Bong Joon-ho has returned to movie screens with a quirky sci-fi comedy about a man who is a glorified test dummy that is reprinted each time after he dies. It's got over-the-top villains and the satirical elements are right on the surface. Join us as we discuss Mickey 17. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David 17.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast. We get together and talk about sci-fi movies. That's simple. And this week we have a brand new theater release. We went to the movies for the first time in a while on this show with other people there.
Yeah. I will say I did not have the worst theater going experience in this one. I expected it to be a lot more packed than it was, but I kind of went at the earliest possible showing of my day. So I think it was maybe like half capacity at max.
Yeah, it wasn't too busy. It's so much more expensive on the weekend. Like Monday's cheap day. Monday's so cheap, and then like going on the weekend to make this record, and it's like, wait, what? It's more than double the price? Are you kidding me? But hey, must be done. We had a new movie to do, and this is Mickey 17, directed by Bong Joon-ho, who has done a number of films over the past couple of decades, but most famously recently would be Parasite, which got mega praise instantly, and frankly, rightfully so. I too praised the crap out of that when that came out in 2021. So, yeah, anticipated to an extent, and I say to an extent, I have a little bit of an asterisk here on this, which is that I have a weird relationship with Bong Joon-ho's films. I think his movies, Parasite, I think Parasite's just a masterpiece. And I think his other films, Memories of Murder and Mother, are both very, very good.
Okay.
All of his films that are science fiction, on the other hand, I don't really like that much. And those being Okja, Snowpiercer, which I found vastly overrated, and what's the other one? The Host. Yeah, that's the other one. All of them left me wanting. All of them, none of them are terrible. None of them are like, garbage or anything like that. I don't mean to speak too negatively, but none of them did something for me. I kind of left them all feeling Whereas his non-sci-fi movies, holy shit, this guy's a once-in-a-lifetime talent. Yeah, let him do what he wants. So when they announced that this was what he was doing next, obviously it's interesting because it's an English language speaking film, which is a departure for all the other films that I've seen by him. I don't know if it's the first time he's done it, but it's certainly the first one I've seen of him doing this. Yep. When they announced the concept, I went, oh, he's doing sci-fi. Oh, I think I've got mixed feelings on this. I hope I like it, but he's got a weird precedent with me now. And then the trailer was very zany, and that's one of the things that I like. I know it's not about all of his sci-fi movies, but there's definitely a bit of a zaniness to how he does some things. Right. So, yeah, I went in with a very loaded, conflicted expectations. I'm not going to reveal what I think quite yet, but just before we get into things, of course, we're going to start spoiler-free. We always do. We'll give you warning before we get into the spoilers. And if you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch. And you can support the show and get bonus content and shows over on Patreon, but I'll tell you more about that at the end. So yes, Mickey 17. Premise is quite simple. It's the future, and Robert Pattinson plays Mickey, who is an expendable. No, he's not been recruited by Sylvester Stallone and Jason Statham.
Man, I read that. I saw that in this little synopsis as I was going in the movie. I'm like, oh no. Oh, yeah, God.
I didn't read it. They started throwing the word expendable around. Do you want to be an expendable? And I just kept picturing the lineup from the Expendables movies. I'm like, what?
He's a rogue militia force of out-of-work actors? I'm confused.
But no, an expendable in this case is someone who is basically allowed to die, and they'll be reprinted with their sort of brain downloaded into this new body after each death. And it's called Mickey 17 because the main Mickey that we focus on is the 17th iteration of Mickey. So quite simple. They're on a strange planet. In fact, this process is banned on Earth for lots of ethical reasons, which we'll talk about a bit more in spoilers, but that's kind of the basic gist of it. And honestly, that's a very high concept thing, it didn't actually tell me what the plot was going to be. I didn't know where it was going to go with this, going into it. What was it actually going to be about when we get to the second and third act. So that was kind of like a journey of discovery, and I don't mean that as a complaint. That's actually quite nice to not know exactly where it's going to be going. So, but that's the basic gist of it. So I will quit my rambling and ask the simple question. David, what did you think of Mickey 17?
Well, I'm gonna jump into my own ramble here a little briefly. My experience with Bong Joon-ho is not nearly as vast as yours. I'm pretty sure all I have seen from him is Snowpiercer and Parasite going into this. Obviously, Parasite, great movie, loved it. I'm not as down on
Snowpiercer was English speaking.
Yes, it was. I was going to comment that.
Now you've just said that, I just clicked in my head. Yeah, Chris Evans wasn't speaking Korean in that. Yeah, go on.
Either that, he was very good. He was very understandable.
It was so good that I just, like, my brain just heard the English coming off of him, like it was being translated in real time.
That's what makes a perfect communicator. But no, I liked Snowpiercer a little bit more than you did. I agree with the left wanting. I felt like it was a larger concept that was kind of just, the coolest parts were just dipped upon and then ultimately pulled back on for the sake of just getting this plot out of the way. But ultimately I did like Snowpiercer overall. Going into this movie, I always try with these movies to avoid as much as I can. I try not to see whatever, but the last time we went to the movies for whatever it was, I did get a trailer for this one, and I can't even remember what it was in front of, but I felt that same idea of, oh, okay, I just saw Parasite fairly recently, and then zaniness, and I don't know, like, I'm not as familiar with the zany aspect of what you're talking about in terms of his filmography, just because I do have limited there, but yeah, it felt strange. It wasn't a turnoff for me immediately, but it did color my perception of what it was going into it. I was waiting for a bit more of a comedic beat than the seriousness of what Parasite was. So, answering the question finally of what did I think of this movie, positives, I think that the visual effects, I think all of the sci-fi elements to it are extremely well done. I think that in terms of a character story analyzing Mickey, it is absolutely fascinating. It does a very good job of going through and getting you to fully understand this character in a world that ultimately is very foreign. Downsides, I feel that same thing of all the coolest parts I feel were barely dipped upon, and it just kind of it left me wanting so much more of this world, so much more of the events that happened to this character, and it felt like just as soon as we were about to get the coolest part of it, they just stop that plot and move on to a new one. And ultimately, by the time we get to the third act, it kind of feels like it wasn't as set up as it should have been, and yet ultimately eats up the entire back half for me. And also, it's just not the most interesting part. I think there's 2 or 3 much more interesting plots that it should have been focused on, and it just kind of left by the wayside. But in terms of enjoyment, by the time the movie was done, I left knowing that it wasn't a favorite of mine, like just as I'm leaving the theater, but I still had to sit with it and try to figure out, was it something that I think is going to be remembered, I guess? Is it going to be something that is in that same vein of Bong Joon-ho is just kicking him out and he's doing a great job each time?
I mean, I think it'll be remembered in the sense that I think there's going to be a following. I think there's going to be a cult audience for this who loves it and laps up, because they just love exactly the flavor of this, like the exact way, sense of humor, the exact way it does things, the exact performance that Mark Ruffalo is giving. They're going to eat it up, and I think I like this more than his other sci-fi movies. Okay, but I still think it doesn't quite like slam dunk for me in terms of actually making me feel like I'm super invested in it. And I think part of it, maybe it is a tone thing, maybe it's like a sort of the zaniness of it. Like, I kind of, like, I don't necessarily dislike what it actually focuses on in the third act. I think where it goes, I kind of saw coming early on. There was kind of like a tease of it early, and I was like, oh yeah, I can see it going there, and it kind of thematically fits in with what the whole Mickey character's going through, and I can see like why you do it. So we'll talk about more on that in spoilers, but I think there's definitely a chunk in the middle where it introduces something that feels like, okay, this is what the focus of the movie is now, is this. It's this thing you've done Not quite at the start of Act 2. Honestly, I'd have to really think about where the acts break down this if I went to. But once it introduces that thing, I thought, okay, that's what this movie's about. It's going to be a quirkier version of something else, which I won't say because it spoiled what it is. But it kind of feels like it doesn't want to completely focus on that for the rest of the movie. Like, it kind of treats it like it's like, I don't know, like we've moved on. Like, I couldn't believe, because the thing that's introduced is kind of a secret for a while from most characters, and I couldn't believe how quickly it was exposed to everyone.
Right.
I really thought we were going to go like a lot of the movie with this being like the core thing of hiding what's happening, and instead it's over really quickly, and I found myself having to sort of shift gears again. I'm like, okay, this idea of like I'm not this is not an automatic vehicle. I had to reach over and like get the gear stick and like put it into the right place, and that takes you out of the movie a little bit, having to do that in a sense, right?
Yeah.
The director's supposed to be driving the car. I'm meant to be enjoying the ride. This is a weird metaphor that I keep going with, but it works. Yeah, that's kind of like the feeling I had, and when it got to the end, and there's one or two little things it does at the end that kind of, I was like, I thought it kind of padded out the last 10 minutes with just some unnecessary stuff, which I'll also critique. I do think the performances are good. Pattinson's solid in the role. Obviously, whether or not you like this kind of like whiny New York accent that he's got going is kind of a taste thing, I think, more than anything. But like, obviously, he's playing the role well. And Naomi Ackie, I think, is the actress who plays kind of the main I guess love interest. I mean, it feels weird to just say that in this context, but I think she's solid. Obviously, Toni and Collette and Mark Ruffalo play these just awful politician type characters that are, I mean, the satire is like just like it's
I'll just come out and say it here, like,
yeah.
I am amazed that filmmakers have latched on so easily to the shorthand of that character's wearing a red baseball cap.
It's very easy to do. It's very easy to do. Here's the thing. I think their performances are great, and I did laugh repeatedly at how ridiculous Ruffalo was being. The weird thing is, though, is that Ruffalo's performance in this felt like it was, and he may have shot this first because this was on obviously shelf for a little bit, but it felt like a redo of his performance in Poor Things. There was a lot of like parallels between how he played that character and this character, and it was entertaining. Like, he has fun in this movie, and he is easy to hate, and you can kind of latch on to hating him as this this slimy politician who clearly doesn't care about people and all that. And it's almost like one of the things that I think this movie has a little bit of, actually, kind of through his character and kind of the colonization dream that is talked about and stuff.
Yeah,
it reminded me of Starship Troopers and the way they talk about.
Like
there's definitely a little bit of that, like, comedy Verhoeven satire kind of sneaking in there with some of that. So. And that's not a bad thing per se, but I have to admit, like, I think maybe it's just a taste thing, but part of me was thinking I almost would like this played more straight, perhaps, than it is, or at least if it was going to play it in a sort of dark comedy with a lot of laughs and stuff like that. I do wonder if there's just different senses of humor that would just click with me a little bit, because humor is a really tricky thing. I find humor to be one of the most subjective things in all of like media, all of like genres or writing or performing, because something that's one person finds funny is just not going to tickle the next person the exact same way. And it's not because one's good and one's bad necessarily. Obviously there is bad comedy, there absolutely is, but amongst all of the comedy that does hit with certain audiences, it does just tend to hit with certain audiences. And sometimes I just, like, I felt this movie, like, sometimes it did make me laugh and it did sort of succeed in sort of doing its thing, but there was definitely lots of times where I felt like, oh yeah, this has been funny right now, but without me laughing. I'm just thinking, this is being funny.
I think that the humor won out for me more than it probably did for you. I was into it a lot more than I was, but I did notice there were a bunch of moments where it felt like there was so much going on, like it was kind of humor just by babbling, like it was like multiple conversations all happening at the same time, so much to keep track of, and it was just funny because like the main centerpiece is something that's so outlandish, and all this battling going on the side is supposed to be accentuating that. But ultimately, I just found myself confused and a little bit losing track of like, okay, but what here's actually funny, because the only thing that's funny is the reaction to this other thing that's happening. And that's the kind of humor that didn't work for me. It reminded me, not nearly as badly, but a little bit of like the Ghostbusters 2016 sort of thing, where there's the scripted humor really works, but the moment you just have a bunch of people ad-libbing and throwing on top of things, that's where it starts to fall apart a little bit.
Yeah, there's also a little bit of it where it feels like, I don't want to say college humor. I don't know if that quite fits what I'm trying to say, but there's like one particular section that it felt just kind of like, oh, we have to go through the initial reaction to this new element that's been added in, and we're going to have characters just kind of talk about it in the way that college kids do, where they're like, oh, this would be so awesome if this happened, and we're going to like sort of like, I feel like given where the movie goes after that, I just don't know if we actually need the characters to go through that particular, like, you know, series of comedy beats before the plot can move on. Because I think there's a lot of heart in the movie that I wanted to latch onto, and I did like. Yeah,
that's the thing with like, again, the thing I was really digging, and I think the movie did really, really well, is the character of Mickey. I think it really went in deep of, you understand him, why he's made these choices, how he got to where he was. But ultimately, there's a few things that are brought up that feel like by the end of the movie, they're supposed to be kind of emotional turning points, moments where he comes to realize things about himself. But because we've been so busy with all of this other stuff happening, it feels like we didn't actually get that.
Yeah, because I've got really strong thoughts about his relationship with Nasha, which I do want to talk about a lot once we get to spoilers. But I will say, while I really like some parts of it, I do think it kind of falters on some other elements because it decides to do certain things. Okay. And I've got a lot to say about that when we get into it. There's also another character who I felt like seemed important, but then just disappeared pretty much before all the third act stuff kicked off. You know? And that kind of bugged me a little bit as well.
The Pigeon Man? Yeah.
The Pigeon Man. No. There's another female character who seemed like she was going to be important somehow, and I thought it was going to be like, oh, we're going to have these characters debate some of the ideas before the more cartoony, slimy politician characters get to debate things, and instead it just never, like, it just kind of, we just glossed over that pretty much. So
honestly, I feel like this is kind of a weird part where this is probably more representative of like, it's weird to say, but like a real life, you know, like this is, some characters are going to dip in and out. Some characters are not going to be as important later on as they are in the early bits, but that doesn't make for a satisfying narrative. You know, it makes it just kind of, you're wondering, it's literally a Chekhov's gun situation where we meet these characters, we are told that they are important, and then by the time we hit the end, it's like, well, they were there, I guess.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if there was some. It's just wild to have a sort of prominent supporting character who is just absent for the entire third act. It's kind of strange, and I mean, arguably technically there's two, but at least the other one had a lot of other payoff in other ways, sort of before the end of the second act.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm still conflicted. Like, I think I'm fairly positive. I don't think it was a bad time, and it was a lot of things to like, and I can kind of see why some audiences are going to fall in love with this, and it's going to like just tickle them in the exact right place, because like the way it does its satire is just going to click with them so much that they're going to love this and think it's a masterpiece. And I'm not going to sit and say they're wrong per se. I just don't think it does the things that I need it to do to have it hit that stat. Like, to me, this and Parasite are like, you know, there's like a gulf between them. Parasite is a masterpiece that, you know, I think I gave it an 9.5 when I reviewed it at the time. It's the sort of thing where in time that may be a 10, because it is that fantastic. It is, and it's what's so. This is the thing about the satire, and this is that movie is all satirical. Like that Parasite is like full of commentary and satire about society and the class system and all that stuff. But even though there is still technically some comedy, it's done in such a played straight way that it makes everyone feel so real, and you really care about them, and you get surprised almost when you realize how much you actually get tensed up and care about the situation some of the characters are in when they started off feeling like this goofy family. This movie never, like, there was some heart there, and I did sort of find myself caring a little bit about some things and here or there, but it never quite hits that where I'm like, oh, I am so like I care so much about them pulling this off in the third act or doing this, you know, it never quite hit those heights.
And yeah, I think that is again just a focus problem where we spend the first act to the reveal, whatever you want to call that, if it's still in the first act, really setting up what I think is the core interest of the movie. It's really the setting of everything that you can run with and have interest in, and it's so ripe with things it can do. And the second act does explore a lot of those. It takes advantage of a lot of those things. But by the time you hit the third act, it kind of feels like it's unrelated. It's something totally separate from what the initial setup was, and instead it goes with something else that happened in the first act instead.
Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about. I'm sure we're going to have a nice conversation about all these things once we're past the spoiler wall. Just some general things. I mean, the movie looks pretty solid. I don't really have, you know, like it's a little generic in terms of its, like, you know, the spaceship and stuff like that, but it's definitely solid. There's nothing wrong with how it looks. You know, the effects are pretty solid, all that stuff.
Yeah, I'll say effect-wise, I don't know if this is just like Hollywood figured it out. Like there's just a press the button that it works now of duplicating actors, but it was like I never noticed like a point where they were struggling.
Yeah, I have to imagine it's like him and a body double, and then he does the other part, and they just put his face on it. Like now, you know, as opposed to the old split screen kind of thing they used to do. Yeah, I have to imagine it's a lot more high tech than that now. But yeah, I mean that stuff is all pretty impressive. You know, the music was fine. I don't think I noticed any like key themes or anything like that stuck with me, but it definitely didn't detract from the movie.
No. I was going to say, I'm trying to remember like any of the major musical tones, and there was one, but I watched this literally 24 hours ago now, and it hasn't stuck with me. So, yeah, all right. And then there's an alien creature that we get introduced to later on. I think it's a solid design. I do like the design for the creature. It's just alien enough, but still maintaining some level of like, I don't want to say humanity, but some level of like an animal aspect to it, where it has
recognizable biology, I think is what you're trying to say.
What I'm looking for. Yep. It's not like we're not going for some
it's not the thing. It looks like a creature
thing,
that
like
could happen on Earth. It just doesn't happen to exist.
Yeah, exactly. What's that movie Natalie Portman goes into the weird like
Annihilation?
Rift? Annihilation. It doesn't have like any of that stuff going on.
No. So I mean that's pretty much it for spoiler free, I think, unless there's something else you would like to add in.
Not really. You briefly brought up the Mark Ruffalo, and I'm blanking on her name right now.
Toni Collette.
Yes, Toni Collette. I think that while Mark Ruffalo is great at what he does, because it is very clear exactly who he's trying to be, and I think he does a damn good job at it. I also want to bring up Toni Collette just because she's got her own thing going on, and I think she's almost maybe not more villainous, but definitely creepier. She's got a much more unsettling vibe to her than Mark Ruffalo does.
She's kind of the brains behind the whole. Well, not really, but like
they're both idiots.
Yeah, but the sauce. There'll be a lot of talk of the sauce.
Oh, the sauce.
Not even this sauce. A sauce. Several sauces. She loves sauce. Sauce is the true sign of intelligent life and decadence is sauce.
I'm sure that there's a deeper metaphor there, something that like, oh, sauce is representative of this or that or whatever. But as I'm leaving, I'm like, no, that just feels like the kind of thing that, like, sauce is just something stupid that they latch onto to say, like, no, this is what makes a society is sauce.
Yeah, so you can have the meat, you can have the potatoes, you can have the veggies, whatever. But the sauce, that's what separates us from the cavemen.
Yes. Remind me when we get to their reasons for going to this planet. I got some words on that.
So, yes.
One more thing, I guess.
I was going to say, I wonder what her thoughts are on ketchup, because she never brings up simple sauce. Probably too.
That's the poor man's sauce.
Too basic for her. Yeah.
Nobody wants that. One more thing, I would say that while this movie inherently, I think that there is a sort of problem in structure, I will say that it has gotten me very intrigued, almost enough to go and like check out the original book, because I feel like that's the sort of thing where it might just be an adaptational issue. It might just be something where, you know, we're able to spend more time in the character's head, so therefore you're able to get a lot more of this development happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of narration, and the movie starts in media res, where we start off kind of effectively late in the first act, and then jump back and sort of build our way back up to there at the start. With a very, very late title screen as well. The title screen comes in like 25 minutes maybe into the movie.
I was fully expecting it to be an end of movie, like Nolan, like, oh, there it is, right before the credits, but nope.
No, it just took its time. It's like, no, we're not doing it until this pivotal story point and not a second before. So
I really want to see a movie that's like 2 hours long and waits until the hour 15 mark. Like, I want to see someone have the balls to pull that off.
Nolan could do it. Nolan will do a movie where the first half like builds up to the middle, and then the second half goes backwards, and the title card will be in the middle.
And that's right there. Yeah. Probably.
You'll pull some sort of like inverse Tenet or something. I don't know.
I was gonna say Tenet's the perfect movie for that to happen.
Yeah, but
that there it is.
Yeah, but that did a lot of like back and forwards. Like I'm thinking, no, he'll do like a palindrome of a movie, like the entire structure is a palindrome.
Yeah, that's gonna be. He's just gonna get weird with it. We all know that's gonna happen. We're all looking down the line, and he's just gonna be like, "I can make any movie I want. You guys will go see it. Here's a movie where everybody speaks in French, but it's backwards,
and it'll be called Memento 2.
Yep.
Not that he's ever done a sequel. I was in a Batman, obviously. He's never done a sequel.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, spoilers for Mickey 17. You have been warned. So we will dive into it at this point. So yeah, I mean, the trailer actually kind of spoiled this, but I intentionally didn't mention it in that first chunk just in case. But we do end up with more than one Mickey at the same time. Which, yeah, it feels like that's where you go with it, especially because the whole concept is like Mickey 17 is like, okay, so I get killed. They basically just like, we get a whole montage at one point of how they basically said, hey, is this planet safe to like breathe in on? Send Mickey out and he'll like have a good whiff and we'll see what happens to him. And sure enough, he croaks and they have to make a vaccine after a few attempts. But it's this idea of like, well, it's not really him coming back. It's a copy that's being created every time. So the one that's dying is still dead. So the movie ultimately is really about like, how much do we value a life, right? And how much, that like a core idea works for me. And then this idea that one who they think is dead, which is Mickey 17, isn't actually dead. And then Mickey 18's already around. And we have to have kind of them coexist. But that's getting into sort of the middle of the movie. And that's the stuff where I felt they wrapped that up to. Because the whole thing is, this is illegal. We're not allowed to have multiples. And then, like, literally 15 minutes later, everyone finds out. And I'm like, what? I thought we were going to go, most of the movie with this being a secret and them try to sneak around and not have anyone know that there's two of them.
Yeah, but that needs to be the low moment of, like, the movie, where it's like, oh no, they found out about us, everything is wrong and everything's whatever. But it turns out, while it is somewhat part of the low moment, there's, like, 4 other low moment plots happening at the same time. And the fact that they're multiples kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, I will say one thing is so part of the backstory that's set up early on when he starts narrating and saying this, bet you're wondering how I got here. He doesn't say that line, but it's effectively
it's pretty much, yeah.
And it's like, okay, so Steven Yeun's character who's in this movie, he convinced them to open what was the food?
Macaroon.
It's going to be bigger than burgers, he claimed. And they took money from a loan shark. The loan shark's after them, and because they're almost out of time, that's why they signed up to come on this colony vessel. And Mickey, being the idiot that he is, decides to just put his name down for the expendable opening. And the woman even says, "Did you read the book, the guidebook?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then the narration goes, I wish I read that book.
Yeah. Well, it's you see like a couple of the positions and they're things that are like obviously useful to a colony. Like it's like spaceship pilot. It's like soldiers and stuff like that. And he's like, well, I don't know how to do any of that. So I just put down the one that didn't have that requirement.
Yeah. And it works. It gets him the job.
Well, because he's the only person who put it down out of anyone ever.
Yeah, and there's a whole extended bit here actually where he's kind of like lured more into it because the woman, the scientist lady who comes to like escort him to like get his readings and stuff, like, he's like, oh, I could smell her hair, and like it was like enchanting. All I could think, I didn't even hear a word she said because I was just too busy, just in ecstasy on the scent of her hair. And I'm like, God, Mickey, you're such a loser.
I have to assume that Mickey by that point was a virgin. Like, there's no reason to think otherwise.
Well, the interesting thing that they get into a bit later in the movie is that every time he dies and comes back or gets copied out of the printer, is that each one is a little different personality-wise. Like, some are a little bit angrier, some are a bit goofier, some are a bit more aggressive. You know, like, they do go through... Because at one point when he's explaining this, and it's kind of explaining why 18's a bit more of an asshole, Mickey 17 tells us in the narration that, like Nasha told me that number 8 was like a real piece of work. Like, there's this idea that, you know, some of them have been kind of worse than the others, and it's just been like, oh well, I hope this one dies quick so I get on to the next one. Yeah, kind of attitude. Which I do want to say, the repeated visuals of him coming out of this printer, it looks like an MRI machine basically, but he's coming out of it. One of my favorite little details here that they did is sometimes when he's coming out, he sort of like jolts backwards and forwards a little bit, and it's like paper coming out of a printer. It's not quite smooth. It kind of like and then starts coming out more again. I like that.
It's when you got to flip the paper over to print on the other side. It's that it just juts back in for a second.
Yeah, I like that little detail. I just gave it a little bit of a... I mean, it was funny. Obviously, it was... Because a big part of this, of course, is how none of the scientists or the people on the ship, other than Nasha later on, as we find out, no one actually considers him like a human being, basically. They don't care.
Yeah.
Highlighted by the fact that at one point, the Scottish guy that works in the lab wasn't looking, and the table wasn't there for him coming out the printer, so his body just comes out dangling out onto the floor.
One time he wasn't looking, and another scientist noticed, and like very quickly they run over, put the table underneath, and then like 20 minutes later they show the same sequence again, and nobody cares that time. He just flops down.
Yeah, because a lot of this explanation stuff at the start, other than the loan shark thing is how I got here, is a lot of like, okay, the first time they had him die seemed to be like, oh, we wanted to test and see what all this like radiation from the solar light does. So you're not actually out there to fix a wire, Mickey. You're just there to see what happens to you. You're getting hit with ungodly amounts of radiation.
They're like, yeah, do you feel dizzy, nauseous, anything like that? They're like, yeah, a little bit. It's like, cool. Let us know when you go blind, because that's the next step there. Yeah,
the other one that got me a chuckle is I think it's when they're testing one of the viruses or whatever from the planet. But they print them out and they're like, hey, Mickey, this life's only going to be about 10 minutes, but hey, that's kind of special. You'll be the shortest Mickey ever. But you are going to bleed from your eyes, ears, mouth, nostrils, and your anus. So just, forewarning. And I'm like, this is miserable.
Yeah. And then the one of the female scientists, who we do get a little bit more of later in the movie, comes up and she's like, did you hear the good news? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to be the shortest Mickey ever, 10 minutes. And she's like, actually, it's more like 15. It's like, oh, cool. Great.
5 more minutes of suffering.
Yeah, kind of amazing.
What a nice time. So yeah, obviously all this is funny, but it's also kind of really hitting home this idea of like the disregard for human life, and that no one's really considering him to be a human being, despite the fact that he still very much is. And certainly no one's asking the question of like, is each Mickey individually a life? And therefore, like, how do we, get into that?
Well, I mean, nobody on the ship is, but once we get to the part where it's multiples, like we find out that this whole ethical discussion of like what is okay, what is not, already happened on Earth.
That's what I mean, though. It's like everyone, nothing we see at this point in the movie has anyone talk about this. They just don't care about him, and that's kind of funny, but it's funny in a dark way. Once we get, because there's like one throwaway line early on when he's saying, hey, you're not allowed to do this on Earth, but he doesn't really elaborate on it then. It's not until later when there's multiples and he has to explain to us, oh, this is a big no-no, and here's why. And it turns out that one of the scientists who helped develop all this stuff, that helped invent this like body printing tech, he was a serial killer. And he was able to get away with it for a little bit of time because he made duplicates of himself so he could have an alibi, whilst one of the other copies was murdering homeless people. And that's like a whole little, like, it's almost like a little self-contained story we get at one point in the middle where it just sort of goes into all this. But basically it's like, like, okay, we won't do this on Earth, but we want to take this to space because it's useful for colonization in dangerous situations and whatnot.
And that's specifically Mark Ruffalo's character, who's like, I'm going to send a colony up to space because that's just what I'm going to do. And if we can't use this tech on Earth, I propose that we do a test run on the new colony, just because why not?
Yeah, which is probably a nice segue into talking about, like, him, his wife, and, like, the purpose of this whole thing. So
Yes.
we basically get early on, whilst Mickey is, like, at the sign-up for this stuff, there's, like, a news reporter who goes around and does some exposition for us. But we find out that Mark Ruffalo's character, Kenneth Marshall, failed to win elections twice.
Oh, if only.
He is a loser. But he's determined to go be like the king of an empire somewhere. So he's taking a colony ship to another planet where he can be in charge. Yeah. And we see some of his supporters, who, to be fair, are a variety of nationalities, right? There's a lot of like British people and stuff talking. Yeah. So it's not too one-to-one. But they are wearing red hats with a slogan on them. So
yeah,
worth pointing out.
So later on in this movie, we get him basically propagandizing towards the people on the ship, and he's saying like all this stuff that they're going to do and whatnot. And the line that got me was that the planet that they're going to, it's called Niflheim, which is a Norse mythology thing of the frost giant world. So it fits because it is an ice planet. It is horrible and windy and snowy and awful. But because it is covered in snow, the one thing he says in the propagandizing speech is, and we will take this white planet with a pure human species. And I'm like, okay, you're laying it on thick there, buddy.
At the dinner table scene, they say like pure race, like probably a good like 3 or 4 times. Yeah,
they're talking about this girl's genetics and how she's perfect for their race that they're building. It's like, oh god.
Yeah, like it's not hiding its politics by any means. I did laugh a little bit though, because like, hey, we're going on this colony ship, and he's going to be, ruler of this new place since he couldn't like make himself ruler on Earth. And I thought when we saw the planet again, I was like, you picked the planet Matt Damon was on Interstellar to go to. That was a bold choice.
Exactly.
That was a bold choice.
I was thinking that same thing. I was like, so what we're going to get is you're going to go crazy and then try to escape the planet. Got it.
Yeah, I mean, the performance is really good because he really laps it up. He's got this ridiculous set of fake teeth in, so that he's got this like phony smile all the time. He, the big speech he gives at the cafeteria early on when they're on the ship is about how they're really, and this didn't come up as much later as I thought it was going to, given how much they emphasized it here. But he goes on a whole thing about how like, there's a very strict calorie budget for like what everyone's eating because we have to make the food last until we get to the planet, so on and so on. And he says that one of the things that's a waste of calories is sex. So we're outlawing sex on the ship until we get there. However, when we do get there, it's open season because we have to populate that planet. We have to spread our seeds.
Generation 1.
Yes.
Oh god, spread the seeds. That kept coming up, didn't it?
Yeah, he said that a few times. So
like, that was everybody was so pumped about that. Like later on, they're exploring the planet, like going into a cave, and the one guy's just like, we got to spread our seed. We gotta germinate the planet. It's like, stop talking like this. I hate it.
And as he's given that speech, it actually intercuts to Mickey and Nasha having sex on the ship. So clearly, not everyone's listening to what he's saying right now.
I bet most people aren't. I'm sure outwardly everyone's like, yeah, you rock, you're awesome. And then internally they're like, okay, but we're still going to do that.
I mean, yeah, obviously. Yeah. I mean, I think the relationship between Nasha and Mickey is interesting because they basically just see each other in the cafeteria. I mean, you didn't really get to hear their conversation because like the music or the speech is playing over it. So they just kind of, we see them reacting. We see the montage of them having sex and whatnot. And it kind of like gives us some parts of it, kind of fills it in a little bit later on as time goes on. There's a really nice touch it does where early on it's like, okay, does she know he's reincarnating or getting copied? And it seems like, she does, right? Because that's made clear as the movie goes on. But an element that I really liked that it introduced much later when it was showing why Mickey like feels so attached to her is this idea that it goes back to something that he'd already shown us when he was like telling a story. Because he told us part of the story about how he was put in this big test tube as they were testing this virus on him to see how quickly he would die. And
quarantining.
later on, we see more of that where Nash is there watching through the glass. And she was there the first time from outside the window, but now later on we get to see the full version where she like barges in and says, hey, he's in there alone. You put him in there alone. Give me one of those hazmat suits. I'll go in and sit with him. And there's this really nice shot of like her holding him as he's dying in the big test tube. And it's like, oh, that's actually really sweet. And I like, this is actually one of the things that I both love and hate about this movie is this relationship between Mickey and Nasha, because I think moments like this and this idea that she really cares about him and this idea that she, you know, ultimately like has a heart and what, you know, does a lot of the right things at the end. Like, you know, at the end, she's the one saving the alien baby thing and all that. And like all that. Yeah, really solid. I do think some of the stuff in the middle, when there's two Mickeys and we have to go through the whole period of she's high on Oxy and she just wants a threesome with the two Mickeys.
Yeah.
It almost felt like the movie was setting her up to look like the unsympathetic one, and for the other woman, Kai, to be, oh, maybe she's the right one for Mickey. And that's not where the movie goes at all, which is fine, but it felt like a weird pivot, especially since as the movie went on, it felt really clear. No, Nasha is does have this heart and does care about Mickey. So it kind of made all the immature, oh, I want to have a threesome with the two Mickeys, like, be a little, I don't know. Like, I'm not saying you can't broach that subject, because I get why it would come up in the situation. Like, obviously I do. But the way it's just instantly, oh, I know about this. Oh, come on, this would be hot. Let's just do it.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pacing problem. I feel like it's an issue where if you make that the sole focus, if you make that something that does have so much attention throughout the movie, then it could really work as this idea of Mickey's insecurities beginning with her, possibly going over to this other girl and then realizing, oh no, wait, Nash is actually the right one for me. And then when he has like those memories of her sitting with him as he's dying in this test tube, like it really allows him to drive that point home of saying, yeah, she's the right one for me. But because that little subsection of the yes, no threesome thing happens within 20 minutes, smack dab in the middle of the movie, surrounded by all this other stuff, and it's totally wrapped up there, it just doesn't feel like a complete plot.
And not only that, like, I think the two unsympathetic parts is one that she immediately just jumps to that whilst being high on this drug. And to be honest, everything with this drug I felt was just unnecessary in the movie.
Oh, yeah,
I think you could take out this entire subplot. It's not needed, it doesn't add to anything. It's not funny when they're on it, to be honest. But, like, so you've got that on its own, and then you've got the thing where Kai walks in, right? So before Mickey came back here and, like, Nasha tried to initiate a threesome, Mickey was with Kai. We'll get to why he was with Kai initially in the first later on, but like he's with Kai and Kai's like being all sympathetic with him and tries to go in for a kiss, and he kind of like realizes it's happening and says, no, I need to go see Nasha.
Yeah, I like because Kai specifically says like, so are you and Nasha open as she's leaning in, and he's like, oh right, Nasha, nope, bye.
Yeah, so he makes that choice, and then when he goes to Nasha, she's already high on this oxy, and she's like, hey, you'd love it if there was two of me. Come on, let's do this. And I think if you're going to present this to me, I think the idea of like she calms them both down to try and like, because you know the tensions were high before. They're like basically 18 was trying to kill 17 earlier. We'll talk more about like how that all came about, but
yeah,
like to calm them down, and then this idea that maybe it sort of naturally starts to happen, where like you know she's sort of like comforting him, and then like maybe kisses him, then the other one walks. Like maybe it could start to happen organically, where oh this is a thing that's maybe just going to. You know, it's just going to happen. Yeah, that might have felt better to me than her just being like high and being like, "Oh yeah, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like you have to do this right now, right?" But the other thing that made it a little bit like weird for me and unsympathetic is that Kai halfway through this scene, before they really get to doing anything, Kai walks in and catches them, and it's a big no because multiples are illegal, and this like she'll probably because both Kai and Nasha are both technically part of the military or the soldier police that are on the station or the ship, right? So Nasha runs out after her and like tries to talk to her. And earlier on, they sort of teased that like, there's a bit of tension here because Kai tried to talk to Mickey at the cafeteria table, and Nasha came up and just made out with him to like really like mark her territory. It was like just a little scene that happened earlier on. Right. So Nasha runs up and says, "Hey, now you can't. Come on, think about this now. Don't rat him out. Come on, you shouldn't be telling on us." And it cuts back to the Mickeys for a second, and when it cuts back to the two ladies, they're basically negotiating, and Kai's like, all right, I'll have 17, you keep 18. And Nash is like, no, 17 and 18 are both Mickey. They both belong to me. And I'm like, what the hell? Why are you, like, you're divvying him up like he's, like, goods. It felt really weird to me.
That's where I think the pivot point's supposed to be, where we care less about Kai, where it's more revealed that, you know...
Sure, okay.
I see the way that it's supposed to be presented, where Kai's like, okay, I'll take one, you take the other. Whereas we have Nasha believing, no, you know, it's all the same person. It's all still him. It's not something where it is divvied up amongst multiple people here.
What I will say, if the point of this was for that Nasha at some point would realize, oh wait, I've been kind of objectifying him, almost like spinning this on its head, because normally it's men objectifying women, right? And normally it's men who talk this way about women, and it's really, you know, whatever, right? It's disgusting. If you had, like, her sort of realize, oh no, I've kind of, like, you know, if she realized that she was treating him in the same way that everyone who just sends him out to die is treating him, because, oh, he's just too, like, in a line of, like, you know, toys for me to use, kind of thing. If she had that realization and felt bad about it, and it kind of, like, motivated her character going into the third act or something, I would probably be okay. I'd be okay with this. I'd be okay with her saying these things that feel a bit weird and possessive if there was growth that came from it. But I didn't really feel like any of the, like, nice moments or growth that came later had anything to do, or any realization to do, with how she had been treating Mickey in this. Because all the good stuff she's done for Mickey is all flashbacks that already happened. Right? So she's already this great person to him.
Everything that happens between this conversation of Kai and them, this almost threesome, everything there, the moment that Mickey 18 decides to do something rash, it's done. It is no longer elaborated on. Nothing else matters, to the point where, like you said, Kai is not in the third act.
Yeah.
Kai is gone.
She disappears until one little moment at the end during a speech where she just kind of, like, gives the finger to Nasha. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, surely... like, really? You still beefing?
Yeah. It's 6 months later. Get over it.
And she's got, like, a new girlfriend, but it looks of it at the end as well. So that was also a bit weird. But yeah, she has nothing to do. Like, the entire third act and everything the characters, like, care about and are trying to fix. Because this is the thing. The movie pivots into, oh, these aliens that are on the planet are not monsters. They don't want to eat us. In fact, they saved Mickey, right? Mickey 17 is alive because, unlike all the other humans, these creatures decided to help him and thought, oh, he shouldn't be left to die. We should get him out of this cave that he's fallen into. And that's really nice. And it's like, oh, I see where this is going. And that made me think of Starship Troopers, because it's kind of the opposite of Starship Troopers, where Starship Troopers, it's all about, oh, we have to kill these creatures, and the satirical ending is, hey, like, we did it, and we've killed them, aren't we all heroes? Yay! This would be the opposite, presumably, where by the end, oh no, Mickey, because he, like, sympathizes with them because, hey, they actually treat me well and they value my life, so I'm going to value their life and I'm going to help them not die. You know, by the end, I can see where roughly that's going. And it kind of does that. Like, that's kind of where it goes. But it sort of pivots to that so much, though. And, like, during the entire third act, when all this is going on, and they've got one of the baby creatures and the mummy creature and all the other creatures outside want the baby back, Kai is just nowhere to be seen on any of this. Like, she's just not a part of it. It's so strange.
Her last bit where she shows up is during a failed assassination attempt. And I really want people to understand the pacing of this movie here, where we go from, in the span of about 20 minutes, threesome failure and the divvying up of boyfriends, failed assassination attempt, extermination of all this alien species. Like, it's in this back half so breakneck and disconnected that by the time you hit that last bit, it doesn't, like, you used that car analogy before. It's been shifting gears so much that you don't know whether or not this is the thing you should be paying attention to now, or if we're waiting for something else to happen. There's also a thing in the middle where the loan shark bit from the beginning comes back up.
I was just about to throw that in. Right in the middle of all this, when we're in the prison cells because of the assassination attempt, Stephen Yeun shows up and says, oh, by the way, I got an alert from the loan shark saying that it'll let me go if I hack you up with this double chainsaw. So sorry, Mickey, but I'm going to have to do it. And that's like a whole scene where they get to break out of the cells. And listen, like, honestly, everything with the loan shark stuff popping back up, everything with the oxy drug, all of this, I think, should have been cut. I think the movie would just be tighter for it.
Yeah, I think any and all of it would be fine for its own movie, for its own like thing going on. But ultimately, with where they decided to go with this one, yeah, it's useless. There's no reason to have it developed here in that sort of standing. The only thing it feels like to me is that this kind of strikes me the same way as like a Sony Spider-Man movie, where it feels like they do have another sequel down the road planned, and they just want to get this set up early so that way they can capitalize on that properly. But I know that's not what they're doing. I know that this is supposed to be its own thing, so I don't know why it's here.
Yeah, yeah. Like you say, it sort of jumps around quite a bit, get into the third act, and I mean, I like the underlying idea of what the third act is, and I like the the whole like, okay, so we've got a few like plates in the air. We know that the Mickeys are in danger. Our villains like as hateful as ever. We should probably go back and let's try and work through some of this in order.
Yeah, let's start with the initial premise at the beginning, ignoring all the exposition backstory stuff that we pretty much already worked through, is that Mickey 17, he falls down into a crevice in this ice planet, and his friend shows up, takes his flamethrower, and says, all right, well, I'm just going to leave you for dead because I'll just print you out anyway. And then a bunch of these alien monsters come in and attack him, and it seems like he dies until we go through the whole backstory. And then...
I would like to point out that I kind of called that they didn't kill him, though, at the start.
Oh, absolutely.
One, because it just faded to black, and also because, okay, they've already established in the dialogue that this one that we're seeing at the start is number 17, and the movie wouldn't be called Mickey 17 if Mickey 17 wasn't the important one. So,
yes, you can call it, but I do think that they kind of led you to that. I think it is something that they purposely did, because they specifically have Steven Yeun's character say, what are you, number 16? Where then in your head, you're like, okay, the next one's 17. But then he gets corrected and he says, no, I'm 17. So you're like, oh, okay. He's going to be the one who lives.
The boy who lived.
Yes. It's a Harry Potter movie now.
Starring the guy from Twilight.
Yeah. Oh, he was also in Harry Potter. He was in the fourth one.
Oh, I forgot that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. But yeah, so the aliens end up saving his life instead. They drag him out of the cave, kick him back up. He thinks it's because they think he's like spoiled meat because he's been printed out. And that's kind of what everyone else tells him as well, is that he's less than human because he has been printed out.
He can't even consider the idea that they just did it because they cared about him, because they thought it was, the nice thing to do. So that realization doesn't... It's actually Nasha who comes up with that later. It's like, wait, they saved you? So they decide to not let you die? That's actually kind of important.
Mickey's just like, well, I guess if you look at it through that lens, maybe I should have said thank you instead of screw you guys.
Yeah,
I'm tasty too.
That's what's so frustrating about the Nasha character, is that her being the one who even reads it that way, and it makes sense that she would, because of how she actually cares about Mickey and wants to like help him through these deaths, and doesn't want to just like disregard him and say, oh no, like it doesn't matter if he's in pain because he's just going to get reprinted. No, she cares about every one of them. That makes her a really interesting character. It makes her the heart of the movie, which is why it's really frustrating that when he does come back and there's two of them, we get this like extended comedy beat with her that I just don't think fits the heart. Again, I think it would if like she kind of like realized she'd fallen into a trap or something, mentally, and said, oh hey, I've kind of like I have become death. I have become villain.
I think it could have also worked if they had leaned significantly heavier in the earlier bits on just how sexually like minded she is.
Oh, sure.
They do have a little bit here where like they're joking around, drawing like sex positions on like a little tablet, which ends up being a critical plot point, strangely enough.
It does actually.
And then they show her like making out with Mickey at the table in order to prove, I don't want to say ownership, but her claim on him.
Yes, dominance.
So if they really leaned into that, the fact that she's like, hey, we've talked about threesomes and stuff before. Let's just lean into this. Let's see if we can make it work. Like, I think maybe that could have worked, but ultimately it just wasn't established well enough.
Yeah, that's fair. So
he walks through the snow. He ends up getting back to the place, but as he looks at the time and he gets back into his room, he discovers, whoops, they've already printed another Mickey.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh, okay, so we're going to do like a zanier version of Moon, right? We're going to be doing that kind of thing. And that's not quite what we do. I mean, Mickey 18, tries to kill him. It's like, hey, there can't be two of us, so I'm going to throw you in this furnace hole. This furnace hole is repeatedly used for, like, you know, threats in this movie. Stephen Yeun's thrown down it at one point at the end of this scene. Later on, the baby alien's dangling in it, and like Nasha has to like hold out of the rope with her teeth to save the
God. I don't have a lot of like ick things when it comes to, like, I can handle eye stuff, I can handle needles, but teeth and like teeth being pulled, nah, that's my limit. Don't like it.
But that was the thing, though, because it kind of like, she was kind of like winning me over again with stuff like this. Like, between her being the one who realized, oh, the alien like saved you, and then like her like diving to save the alien baby, I'm like, yeah, she's kind of the heart of this movie. It's kind of a shame that they kind of made her character wonky in the middle for a bit there.
Yeah.
So, Mickey 18 wants to kill him. It's 17, still kind of weak at this point, so it's not even like he's putting up that much of a fight, really. But they end up hiding because Stephen Yeun's like subplot about selling oxy to people kind of interferes with the scene.
Yeah, this was the first time it happened, I think, in the movie where it just took a diversion. It just totally stopped everything and said, okay, now we're doing this drug selling plot. And I'm like, okay, well,
it does it again as well right after, because after this is a thingy and they're both going back to like the room, right? They've kind of agreed not to kill each other or whatever. And actually, no, they've not agreed on anything. Nasha's shown up, so Mickey 17's hiding, and Nasha starts like putting her arm around Mickey 18, and Mickey 17's getting kind of jealous and like, oh, I'm getting mad now. Like, I'm not usually a mad person, but I'm feeling kind of some rage here. And they're talking about their little sex chart. They're like, I think we could try figure 3B tonight. And he's like, oh, all right, let's do it. So they're on their way back to the room, and he's following them. And there's another diversion here, because out of nowhere, like, other people from the ship come in and say, hey, Mickey 17, you've won a dinner with the leader of our colony. You're going to go speak to Mark Ruffalo and have dinner and try some of his wife's signature sauce.
That sounds worse than it is, and yet simultaneously not enough.
Yes. So we get this dinner scene where he goes to them, and because like basically the Kai's friend got injured when they were looking for the creatures. Mark Ruffalo's whole thing right now is that he wants them to capture one of these creatures so they can analyze it and see what they can use it for and kill it or whatever. So he grilled out Mickey 17 over the comms earlier. Apparently he feels remorse over that now, for whatever reason.
He says he feels remorse. It's very quickly shown. Nah.
Oh, yeah. He's constantly like not remembering people's names. Like he forgets the dead girl's name, and like Toni Collette has to like sort of whisper it into his ear, and yeah, it's a whole thing. But Kai's also invited to this. But so we get the whole speech about, oh, your genetics are perfect. And I honestly thought he was building up to saying, yeah, we're going to have sex tonight to start this new colony. Like, I almost had that feeling of, like, Toni Collette had brought in the pretty white girl for him to...
Oh, this absolutely feels like the middle-aged couple approaching the young girl at the bar, being like, so, can we buy you a drink?
Yes, I was getting, like, serious, almost Handmaid's Tale vibes from this conversation. And the whole time, Mickey's just eating this really raw steak, just over to the side, just shoveling it in his face.
There's a bit in here where Kai is like, okay, before anything else, I wanted to say a prayer for my fallen friend. And they're like, oh, yeah, of course. And, like, she starts to say a prayer, ultimately gets choked up. Then Mark Ruffalo jumps in, and he's like, oh, dear God, thank you for this life, blah, blah, blah. And he starts to... And then all of a sudden, Toni Collette comes in, starts singing a song. And, like, it just leads to this whole other thing that completely ignores the fact that they were even talking about the dead friend to begin with.
And this was the other thing that was making me think that Kai was going to be important, actually. Maybe even the most important thing. Like, not because obviously after this scene where Mickey gets sick, we'll talk about that, and she has that like heart-to-heart with him where she almost kisses him. But in this scene, she's going along with everything he's saying until he kind of like emphasizes the breeding a bit too much, and she eventually sort of like kind of claps back and says, hey, am I just a uterus to you, sir? Yeah. And it feels like, oh, she's fighting back. The movie's making me want to like her. The movie's making me want to root for her.
And it puts her in a position somewhat similar to Mickey here, where it's like, am I just a piece of meat? Am I just something to be used and thrown away?
And notably, when he starts getting sick, because it turns out the scientists put something in this meat they wanted to test. So he starts, and this is the thing, because Mickey 17 is the one we kind of is the important one, the one we care about. It's like, oh, he can't die, but like there's real threat of him dying here. So he's almost going to get killed. And Mark Ruffalo pulls out a gun and says, "This is humane, right?" to the scientist. Like, yeah, this would be humane, sir. And he's like, he points the gun at his head.
He's in an intense amount of pain, like writhing on the ground horribly after they've given him whatever these drugs are and also whatever was in the meat.
Yeah, but he kind of calms down just enough to say, "Oh, please don't kill me. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'll get back up." And it's like, okay. So if they just waited a minute.
Kai tries to jump in the way as well. Kai is also just like, why are you doing this? Like, this is too much. And when she pulls out the gun, she's like, no, don't. Yeah, like, don't shoot him.
That's not the other big thing about Kai and Nasha here, is that all these bits where it's making Kai look like she's going to be the ultimate like main love interest are right next to all the bits where Nasha's like doing like her worst stuff. So it double emphasizes the fact that we think the movie's going to pivot from one to the other.
And I'm fine with if they're writing this on the wall in order to give Mickey doubt, in order to say, okay, maybe I want to be with Kai instead, and then explore that. I think that could work. But again, it get wrapped up in like 20 minutes after all this is said and done. Not even.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with like it not going down that path either. But Kai should still feel like she's a factor in the movie after that point, and she just isn't. It's really strange. So but like then the stuff plays out we kind of already talked about, where he's with her on his own, and then goes back to Nasha, where she's already Mickey 18's already told her, hey, there's another one of me, there's two of us now, and she is excited about it. So that stuff plays out. All of it comes crashing down though, because while Nasha's talking to Kai about divvying up the Mickeys, Mickey 18's getting kind of pissed because he's hearing the story from 17 about what happened at dinner. And he's like, hey, so what, they poisoned your food, and what did you do? Like, and he gets really upset at the end of the story when he's like, and what did you say after like he almost killed you? Did you?
He's like, tell me you let him have it. Tell me you did something here, Mickey.
And he's like, I thanked him for dinner.
And you just see 18. Like 18 has already been characterized in this movie as significantly more aggressive than 17.
Yes.
Like he's absolutely able to lash out, does not have this sort of timid insecurity that 17 has been characterized by. And 18's like about to throw a punch at Mickey, but you just see him look at this projection screen TV of Mark Ruffalo's character as he's doing like a talk show, and immediately Mickey's just like, I'm gonna kill him.
Yeah,
we're gonna go kill him right now. Let's go do that.
I mean, yeah, he's doing like a late night talk show in the cafeteria with a filming crew that's been broadcast throughout the ship. And he's like, hey, we got this big rock off the planet. We're going to cut it open and like carve all our names in. We're the first generation of this colony. We're going to carve our names in.
I love he specifically says, almost all of you will be memorialized on this plaque. And all I can think is, who's being left off besides Mickey?
That was the other thing. See, when Kai's friend died, the way he responded, oh no, a fertile female has died. Yeah. That was the way he phrased it.
He chews out Mickey for not jumping in the way of this cave-in and saving her because he's replaceable, but an extra womb, not so much.
Yeah, I'm not so sure how jumping in front of a cave-in would save the person. It would just kill two people now.
Is one of them really a person?
David, don't be so sexist.
Oh, don't you put that on me. God damn it.
Look, you gave me a little softball, okay?
I know. I had
to swing. So, yeah, so Mickey 18 he wraps up Nasha's gun and like a towel and goes to like where at this point it's just turned into a rally where he's like, yelling about the future and the colony and about how they're eventually all going to have sex and have lots of babies.
Yeah,
and whatever.
On this white planet of a pure race.
And Mickey 18 goes, but as he's like aiming his gun, one of the baby creatures comes out of the rock, right? They've been kind of nestled in there. There's two specifically, because the first one gets obliterated by a firing squad, which all of the other aliens outside can sense, and then they keep the other one captive. And notably, when they get it in the lab, Toni Collette cuts off the tail because to go along with the earlier thing where she was talking about how sauces are important and she loves making new sauces, she then chops up the tail and puts it in a little blender and makes a sauce and then just starts asking people to taste it. And I'm like, wait, to call that a sauce, you have to at least put one other ingredient in it. You can't just blend a tail of a creature and say, oh,
That's what makes it pure. That's what makes it great.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, so just to step back for a moment. Yeah. So at the rally, just a few things to notice that they have it so that Mickey just barely misses Mark Ruffalo. He skims his cheek, so there's just a little scar there. And right after that happens, the second alien pops out. So you have Nasha later on saying, what if we try to spin it that you were actually aiming at the alien and you weren't trying to assassinate him? And it's like, okay, well, we're still multiples, so we're still going to die. It's not like whatever. It's not a big deal. Second from that tail cutting off scene. So earlier on, when Mickey's being dragged through the cave to be saved, we see that the tails are essentially prehensile. They use them as like kind of an elephant's trunk sort of way. But the way that she pins down this baby alien, pulls it out like it's extendable and retractable, and then chops it off. And it's all done in one shot. And like you see it writhing around, you hear the screaming of this baby alien. This may not be a kick the dog sort of moment because it is an alien species, but it's damn sure close. It is the most villainous thing I think is done up to this point, to the point where I'm like, is this going to be a thing where I hate her more than Mark Ruffalo?
I think it is the kick the dog moment because it's by this point in the movie that we have seen the aliens save him, so they're sympathetic and smart. We see them react when the other baby alien gets killed, and then we hear this one writhe in pain. I think at this point they've built up enough evidence to make us realize, oh no, we should care about these creatures. These creatures are not, they're just monsters or anything like that. Fair enough. I would absolutely say that. So, Mickey 17 jumps out to get into the tackle when all this is going down at the rally after the gunshot. So they see him, and Ruffalo's like, multiples! Filthy multiples!
Yeah.
He gets into it. He's really...
No, yeah, he's very... They do a good job of establishing this idea of the cult of personality around him. Yeah. And showing that he is just always got this, I don't want to say in control aura, but like he seems like he's always got a handle on the publicity of himself.
Yeah, he's got like a PR guy who's always there, like saying he's going to capture moments in his camera and whatnot.
There's one point, I think it's during the dinner scene where that guy comes up and they say, oh yeah, so this guy, head of the church, I mean the company. And it's like, okay, so that's clearly what we're going for here.
Yeah. Yeah, and to be fair, like Nasha, when they're in the cages, she's the one that comes up with the, oh wait, you're saying that they saved you? So she has that realization. She's also like, I mean, it's between her and Mickey 18 that get them out, because they kind of lure Stephen Yeun's character over and, grab him and whatnot. And she grabs his gun and, gets them out of there. But once they're like, they kind of get held captive again anyway, and they're taken to like the furnace room, and like the main bad guys there, Mark Ruffalo and his wife and all that, and they're like, hey, we need to kill all these aliens, we've got this gas that's going to do it, but here's the thing, my wife really wants their tails before we make them extinct to make a lot of sauce, so we're going to play a little game. Now we sort of cut ahead and sort of like get some of it from like hindsight context, but basically they've got both Mickeys rigged with explosives, and they were going to kill both, but now, whichever Mickey is able to bring back the most tails will get to live, which is absolutely absurd. But during this, like, again, Nasha is, like, the one who chimes in and says, hey, sir, there's something you need to know. Like, these aliens saved Mickey. Like, he's only alive because they actually showed compassion, so maybe we shouldn't kill them. And makes a whole speech about how we're the aliens here, not them. They're the native race to this planet. And obviously, even before she says all this, yes, it's impossible not to think the whole movie about colonization, about, like the evil white men coming in and just taking everything from whoever's there beforehand. Like, absolutely a big thing. So
it's the implication, though, that they are, to an extent, sentient. They aren't just, to use the Starship Trooper, they're not bugs. Yeah,
they're intelligent, and hell, the scientist ladies even built a little translator to try and translate their noises into language, which works surprisingly well.
The machine works, and that's all fine and good, but and maybe I'm alone in this. Didn't it feel like that just came out of nowhere, like way too quick? Like, it felt like they were like, oh, we just got an alien in custody and we built a translator in 3 hours.
There was one little moment when they were transporting it where she kind of pointed out, like, oh, it's making noises. So it did set up that she was interested in it, at least. But yeah, like the actual idea that she just built a translator did feel like it just kind of came out of nowhere. Because the movie needed to be able to communicate with them for, the last act. So that's why we do that. But no, what I was getting at though is just this, like, again, like Nasha, this is like, she's fully swung back round to, no, she's like kind of the hero of this movie at this point again, and I'm rooting for her, and she's standing up to the bad guy, and ultimately she's going to be the one that's saving this alien baby once the Mickeys are outside, and, she's, because, I mean, hell, he even like intentionally drops the rope that's dangling the alien over the furnace.
They take the alien, they're like, yeah, we were going to kill this thing, but instead I'm going to impale it on a hook and dangle it over the furnace, and then make Tasha, because her hands are held behind her back, she's got to hold it up with her teeth in order to shut her up so she doesn't keep on making all these points.
Yeah.
And then we get, so I don't even know if this was set up earlier in the movie. Maybe I just missed it. We get a reveal that 2 of the officers or whatever that work for Mark Ruffalo are appalled by his abuse of power and are therefore recording this and sending it to some council to show how abusive he is.
Yeah, it's not really, like, you see them recording a little bit earlier in the scene to kind of set it up before they actually step in and say anything, of course. But yeah, it's just like, I think like we did see like, the main guy here like talking to Nasha a few times, like, so I think he's like her superior, like in the like the police or the military, whatever we're calling their division. As far as them like doing this throughout the movie though, no, I don't think there was much set up. If there was, it was subtle and I missed it.
Okay, because that's the part that got me, is that all of a sudden they're just like, record this, see how we'll get it to the council later, and I'm like, everything you've pointed to up to this point is that Mark Ruffalo's character is all but a dictator. Like, he is able to do whatever he wants here because he's the guy in charge. So who are you reporting this to? And
he's a laughable dictator as well, where he's this idiot showman who is nothing more than a... You know what they're going for.
We know exactly what they're going for.
Different mannerisms and all that. He's got to do his own thing, but you get what it's supposed to represent. So, yeah, like this stuff, like, Nasha calling him out, saying, hey, you're just a loser who lost 2 elections, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah, okay, you're making me really root for Nasha again. And I was like, damn movie, can we please, like, be more coherent or be more consistent, I guess is maybe what I'm saying.
Honestly, I think maybe this is just the way that I processed it, because all of us liking Nasha came from the exposition flashback and not things that were actually happening in the plot. The very first time that we're really exposed to her in the actual plot, not the flashback stuff, is the threesome, which immediately paints you the wrong color. I think that they needed to be some more stuff in the actual plot before we got to the threesome. It didn't even need to stop being the threesome stuff, but we needed to have stuff that's not flashback first. Yeah, because even the way that the relationship starts, like I mentioned, you don't even hear their conversation. It's kind of just like narrations over the top of it, music, whatever. And it kind of is like, hey, yeah, we I saw her. She was like an angel and, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think that's maybe also worth mentioning, is that it all kind of comes from his like narration perspective for a long time, and and to be fair, the entire first act is pretty much from his like narration flashback, pretty much. Yeah. And it's strange because he's not an unreliable narrator, but we do get the fact that he's an idiot. We do get the fact that he is something that is able to be fooled. So when we're presented with this fact of, oh, he signed up to this, but he wasn't listening to what the woman said because her hair smelled so good. It's the same sort of tangential thing where when we don't hear what Nasha's saying and we don't see what made them fall in love in the first place, we don't know if it's just Mickey being blinded by her and she's actually a negative force in his life. We find out later it isn't, but we're left with that question the whole way up to the threesome scene, and then that just furthers that belief.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, is that, like, the way we learn about his relationship with her is the exact same way we learn about him, like, having the hots for this redhead who's, like, taking him to the lab for the first time. And that's obviously just this kind of like, no, she's going to, I mean, not use him directly for her own personal gain, but she's like, hey, oh, you've volunteered for this. That's exciting because we need a test puppy for this.
When they do the memory scan to get his memory backed up, he's sobbing because of all the memories that were brought up, and she walks in, pulls out a gun, and says, "Okay, need you to kill yourself now." Like, she's clearly not on his side.
Yeah. That's the other thing that happens during the montage early on, actually, is that when they're transferring the memories into the new printout, the lab guy like trips over one of the cables and it comes out of his brain, and they're like, oh no, I need to put that back in quickly. And I'm like, oh, we'll get left out. We'll get missed because the cable was out.
Second grade basic mathematics, whatever.
Yeah. So yeah, it's almost this necessary evil because there's so much to do exposition for. I like the first act would take a long time if you couldn't montage through it with narration. Like, it would take a lot longer to get through. So I understand why they did it this way, but at the same time, it does make some of like the start of those relationships feel a bit impersonal. If they feel at a distance from the audience because of the way they're presented. So. Yeah,
because you're led to believe that everyone's using Mickey. So again, if the reveal at the end, and there is theoretically that scene where she goes and spends time with him in the tube to show she does genuinely care about him. If the reveal is that she was a nice one all along, that's fine. But it's hard to transition the way we see that character without a lot of legwork being put in to do that.
Yeah. Oh, it's frustrating. Yeah. More thoughts later. Anyway, so yeah, the Mickeys go out and they've got no interest in cutting off tails. They want to go talk to the big main alien, the leader, the queen.
They got the translator now, and they're basically going out to say, hey, they've got a nerve gas. You've brought every alien on this planet to circle our ship in a show of force. You got to disperse. You got to leave.
Yeah, he tries to warn them. He's trying to return the favor and save them. And during this, Mark Ruffalo's like advisor's like, hey, sir, Joe would be so great. Like, he's out there talking to this alien queen. You should be doing this. This could be like the day our colony started, and I can get you on camera. This like historic moment. And we can go out and we can film it. So he gets all dressed up, and in fact, at this point, he's already wearing like a military like outfit. Like, he's got like a colonel's jacket on with medals and stuff. But he gets dressed up in his parka and whatnot, and they're going to go out there to do this. And the big ending of the movie, for the most part, is that the alien says, "Look, I'm happy. Save my baby. I want my baby back, but." You did kill the other baby, so we kind of want to see a human get killed. One of yours needs to die. And
eye for an eye.
Of course, I was thinking, all right, well, Mark Ruffalo is the obvious candidate for this.
Well, I think that yes, he's the obvious candidate for that, but I do think that the movie has done enough setup to say, okay, is Mickey willing to do the self-sacrifice play for a bigger cause? Does that make it okay? Specifically, Mickey 18, who has specifically said, screw all you guys, I'm my own man.
Well, keep in mind, Mark Ruffalo's got buttons on his wrist right now that'll detonate either of the Mickeys. So basically, Mickey 18 like jumps up onto his craft, punches him a few times, and then willingly presses his own button so that he'll blow up holding Mark Ruffalo, and that's the end of the big climax with them.
Because a long recurring motif throughout this movie is that everybody always asks Mickey 17, what's it like to die? Or they ask whatever Mickey version they're on. But he says, what's it like to die? And he never responds. He never says it until much later on, where he's like, I don't know. Because like, I'm always backed up from memory. I don't actually experience death. But what I do experience is like the moment up to my memory backup. And then I'm born again. All of a sudden, I just wake up again. And that's terrifying to me. It's scary. And so during this Mark Ruffalo showdown, Mickey 18 hesitates for a moment when he's got him on the rocks. He almost doesn't press his own button. And Ruffalo calls him out.
And a key detail here as well is that before this, when they were back in the ship, Mark Ruffalo destroyed their data, their brain back up, so they can't be reprinted again. So at this point, like Mickey 17 and 18, if they die, and that's it.
And so Ruffalo points out, like, oh, you're scared too. Like, we're all just scared to die. Like, that is something that is constant. Like, you and I aren't so different. And then 18 calls him up being like, yeah, I am afraid. And then he presses the button anyway to show like, but that's not going to stop me.
Yeah. So he makes the big sacrifice. And I was like, okay, like as much as there were some bumpy roads to get here, I do think this is the right ending. I do, because at this point Nash has grabbed the baby and has ran out with it to give it back to the alien.
Sorry, just need to say, the whole reason that they even know to bring the baby out is because we see Mickey 17 pantomiming the like baby symbol and then doing 3C, and they're like, what's 3C? Meanwhile, Nasha realizes, oh, 3C on our little sex chart was a move titled Bring the Baby. So critical plot elements.
Yeah, that's a bit convoluted.
Yeah,
I'm going to call that what it is. But yeah, she runs out and she has a lot of a lot of parkour moves, jumping around with this alien baby to get it back to the queen. And it's all very fine. I did think that there was a surprising amount of movie left after this. It's not like a ton of time, but it felt like it went on for a little bit. Where okay, so you're setting up that some time passes and Nash is kind of the leader, or at the very least she's important enough now that she's making the speeches. And they're destroying the printer machine for people because we're outlawing it here because clearly it's inhumane and all the rest of it, right? And they're doing all this thing. And Kai's in the crowd. This is the only time we see Kai in the third act is she's in the crowd giving her the finger.
Yep.
Right? But they do this thing. And this was like... The annoying part is that there's a couple of good little bits in this where it jumps back and reveals that this has all been in his head. So I assume that some of it's still technically true. Like, I assume the part where he does talk to the aliens some more and learns that they were bluffing about their death cry that would make their eyes bleed, right? Yes. And it's like a funny little bit. But there's a whole section here where he walks into the room where the printer is and it's still there. And then Toni Collette shows up and he's like, but wait a minute, I just remembered you died the day after your husband. You killed yourself. Yeah. And she does this whole thing where she's like, there's blood dripping on the floor and she's like, it's my new sauce, taste it. And it's basically just all building up to him remembering that this isn't, real. He's like, oh, like you're dead, so this can't be real. And it snaps back to him sitting in the crowd because he's the one that's meant to press the detonator that'll blow up the printer. And then, that's how the movie more or less ends. But I was like, I don't know if I needed this weird, like, extended epilogue dream sequence. I think I could have just had them blow up the printer and be done with it.
Yeah. It's a weird moment because I feel like the point of the moment is supposed to be, especially with that, the wife shows up at the printer and is printing out another Mark Ruffalo. Like, that's the whole reason she's there, to like freak him out a little bit. But the moment is supposed to be that he responds in the way that Mickey 18 would, which is basically telling them, piss off. We don't want any part of you. And that's what shakes him out of it, is that he's no longer as timid and afraid as he was before. But like, was that a plot? Was that a story beat? Was there ever a point where he's like, oh, I wish I was more like you. I wish I was able to, because every time he mentions it, he says, this dude's a psychopath who's willing to just kill people indiscriminately. Like, this is not something to aspire to. But I guess they're doing a thing where it's like, yes, all the Mickeys are just, one person. They are just one independent thing, and any differences between them is just variations on the same theme.
It felt really hokey because when the narration came in during the scene and said, oh yeah, after the printer or after the whole incident, I started having these horrible nightmares. And I'm like, what, really? You're just like going to mention this during the nightmare?
I don't think it was after the incident. I think I remember him saying the line, like, I've always had nightmares.
Oh, it's always had. Either way, it comes up out of nowhere, and I felt like, wait, you're just introducing this after we've already had the climax?
Right.
Why?
Right.
Why do we need this? And then
this feels like something that should have been around. And there is one bit that I thought they were going to tie it back to, but ultimately they didn't, is at the beginning, we get his tragic backstory, which is he was driving in a car with his mom. He's allowed to sit in the front seat for the first time, and he presses a big red button, which he believes causes his mom's car to crash. And so he's weighing with the guilt of that on his conscience forever.
So I like the scene when he first gets his memories backed up and he says, oh, this is like bringing up all these old memories that I forgot I had. And he remembers this, and this is what makes him cry. I liked it in that moment because I thought, oh, this is actually kind of a nice idea that he's sobbing because he's remembering all these negative things that he's repressed over the years. But when this came back up later and he just sort of like casually mentions in front of Mickey 18, oh man, like I still feel bad about, killing mom. And Mickey 18 has to go in his little speech about, what are you talking about? Like, pressing that button had nothing to do with killing mom. She, like, it was a bad driver.
Fault in the car.
Yeah. Whatever. It's not like your fault. I just kind of feel like, I don't know if I needed him to have something like that in his past that he needed to, like, I don't know, like, realize wasn't his fault. It felt like a little bit tacked on as well.
I'm okay with him having this thing that he feels he's being punished for. And I'm okay with him realizing it's not this isn't a punishment for that. That was unrelated to this. But yeah, having this moment where he's talking to himself, and even like what this is saying is that he himself realizes that it's not his fault because they're both the same person. They both have the same backup set of memories here.
Which I think if this was something that the movie focused on, if it was doing, oh, we're doing Zany or Moon, and there was more of this that fleshed it out, I'd be fine with the idea. But for just that one conversation, it feels tacked on and it didn't need to be there.
Yeah, I'd say so. And then we also get this weird bit at the end when he's talking about all the stuff that happened after the fact, is that everyone got imprisoned. Like everyone on both sides was imprisoned, standing trial. And so we get eventually
everyone who was involved in the third act, not only everyone in the ship.
Yeah. Everyone involved in the third act was imprisoned, and they were all just put through the ringer to try to figure out, like, oh, what do we do? How do we stand for that? Because obviously Mark Ruffalo was being an abuse of power. He was overstepping his lines, but at the same time, it was murder. It was absolutely a murder that happened. So it was a question of how to deal with that. But then we also get the reveal of what happens with Steven Yeun's character in a totally separate bit, where the loan sharks guy who was on the ship, they had a fight to the death, and the loan sharks guy was dropped into the furnace.
I feel like this was just so we could finally see someone get in the furnace, because they've been teasing it all movie. I think there was just this feeling that, we have to show someone land in this pool of like molten like lava, basically, and that was
honestly, if you want to give me a character to do that, they say that Mark Ruffalo's wife she committed suicide at some point because of everything that happened. Show her jumping in. She's evil enough. It would have worked. I think that would have been enough.
Yeah, like I say, I mean, I like Steven Yeun, but I actually think most of his character in this is completely unnecessary.
Mm-hmm.
I would take pretty much everything revolving around him out. Just to streamline things, and maybe that would give us more time to develop the early part of the Nasha relationship more, which I do think would benefit from it. And I think the good parts that are there with her are really good. That's the annoying part.
Yeah.
Is that when it's working, it's largely working because of her connection to Mickey. It humanizes everything that's going on, because Mickey's a bit too weird and zany to like like you feel sympathy for him. Don't get me wrong. Like when you see how the others just kill him over and over again without caring, you do start to feel sympathy, even though it's kind of funny. But her actually giving a shit about him is the heart of the movie. It's just a shame that it kind of murkies it up and doesn't develop it just quite enough.
Yeah. And then one other thing I wanted to bring up. It's not actually in this little flashback reveal epilogue thing. It's, I think just before the third act happens, when they're revealing that they have the nerve gas to knock out the aliens. Turns out that they developed that over the point of like 3 Mickey lives, using it on him to like perfect it.
Yeah, I think that's what they were testing when he was in the chamber, being held by Nasha.
Rather than it being, I was a bit confused as to whether or not there was actually a virus outside the ship. Because it seemed like the way they were presenting it was that like all of this stuff that was supposedly the vaccine was actually just them testing the nerve gas. And then eventually they were like, okay, you can hop off.
I just assumed those were both like, different things that happened. Like, there was like
they went through 7 Mickey lives just doing that.
Because we're on 17, so I'm thinking, like 3 or 4 get wasted on testing the outside, and then 3 or 4 get wasted on making this nerve gas.
Entirely possible. I noticed that there was similarity with the way they were both being quarantined at the same time. So I figured, because how else would they justify him being in there? Of just saying like, yeah, we're going to use nerve gas on you.
Sure. Yeah, but they also keep testing things on him anyway. It seems like he just has to accept it. Like, this is just...
I mean, at least the first time when he's sent out to the outside of the ship, they're like, hey, can you check on some wires? And it's only once he gets out there, they're like, but we're not letting you back in.
But that's the first time. And to be fair, it's not like they tell him about the meat that he eats either. They just sort of spring it on him, and then he can't really do anything about it. And the funny thing is because he only remembers up until he got backed up when he gets reprinted, he never actually remembers them tricking him.
Yeah, that's true.
So he would never see it coming. But
at no point, yeah. It's kind of like, I do wonder if there is a thing where anytime he's like about to go do something, he goes and talks to Nasha to say like, hey, I'm going to do this right now. So that way she can inform him like, this is how you died.
So frustrated. And I feel like, I feel like most of this conversation has been mostly talking about the things that aren't quite working or don't click together. But in a weird way, because I do think there's a lot of strengths in the performances and the quirky writing and the heart of the movie and the general satire and like ideas that it's trying to put across, I think there's clear intentions behind it, and a lot of it is quite high in quality. So it's really frustrating that at the script level, it's just there's enough things that are messy or feel like they take away from what the focus of the movie should be, and just, I don't know, bloat some parts of it out a little bit. You know, like I said, I would take almost everything with Steven Yeun, the loan shark, and the Oxy stuff. Like, yeah, you can say at the start he wanted to get on the ship because he was on the run from a loan shark, but it never has to be brought up ever again. That's just why he's there. Now we can forget about it. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. This feels like the sort of thing where this is a 2-hour plus movie, but it's adapting a 600-page novel. And like, clearly something should have been cut out entirely. But yeah, you do have issues where, oh, okay, the loan shark thing is how they get on the ship, so we have to at least mention it. And therefore there's kind of this latent obligation of, and then we have to wrap it up as well. And I think that it would have been better off to just say, we got in deep with the wrong dudes and we hopped on a ship, and that's all you need. That's all.
I mean, hell, you could even just simplify it even more to, I owed some people a lot of money, I had to leave. There you go, done.
Yeah,
and it doesn't.
You don't even need Steven Yeun's character there. Just
no, you don't. I like Steven Yeun, so this is not a knock on him, but I do not think that his character adds anything to the movie, and if anything, it just bloats parts of it out. And because I always felt, every time he showed up, it always felt like, oh yeah, this subplot's rearing its head again. Like, it never felt like it really tied into anything else that was going on. It was always just, oh, here this is. And yeah, it's how they get out their cells at one point, but you could have them do that to a guard instead. You know, it doesn't really matter. It could be anyone.
Not to mention, like, it's told us from the beginning, oh, they're friends. Like, this is a childhood friend of his. But I don't think there's a single point in this movie where I didn't feel like he was being openly antagonistic to Mickey.
Oh yeah, he never cares about him. Maybe that would have made him an interesting character if at one point Nasha kind of like pulled him up and said, hey, why are you always such a dick to Mickey? Why don't you care about him? And maybe he has to wrestle with that, and maybe he has a bit of a face turn, or maybe he even, solidifies how much of an asshole he is. But either way, there could have been like a final point to him as far as his Mickey relationship goes.
If it were establishing even deeper that Mickey, even before he became an expendable, was treated as expendable his entire life, where even his close friend is someone who treats him as like the fall guy, which they say he did because he puts Mickey's name on the loan paperwork. Like, we need more of that. We need a little bit more just to show us that that's happening. That's what I said at the beginning, and I'm coming back to now, is that all of these super interesting things and all of these deeper plot elements that I think would be really interesting to explore just are left as a surface level thing. And there's not that much depth to it except for the establishment of Mickey as a character.
Yeah, I think that kind of boils down for me is that there's so many things in here, so many ideas, themes, and sci-fi concepts that I like to explore, but ultimately it doesn't do enough with them. It's maybe juggling too many of them. And certainly, like I say, I think you could have trimmed it down, or not even trimmed it down, but you could have freed up time for some things that needed a bit more focus by cutting out some things that could have just been left behind and wouldn't have negatively impacted the movie at all.
Yeah.
So, it's a shame that this is such a mixed bag, I think, overall.
It's such a shame for me because we've had this, obviously with all the delays and stuff like that, because of like writer's strikes and stuff. This has been on our schedule forever. This has absolutely been kicked down the road, and I've always wanted it to happen. This
was meant to come out originally, I think, like this time last year. It was like early last year it was meant to come out. It got pushed to later in the year, and then it got pushed all the way to this March, and here we are finally. So, yep. But hey, let's get on to the wrap-up stuff. David,
sure.
What was your scene of the movie?
So I was kind of wrestling with this as I was watching the movie because I was like, as I'm recognizing scenes that I think are good, I was like, okay, but is this going to be something that matters? Is this going to be something that, like, by the time we hit the end of the movie, is going to be something that is integral to the plot or something that I think is at least necessary there? Honestly, I'm not sure that I really got anything that I think is integral to the whole alien extinction plot as a scene of the movie. But I will say that the scene that sticks out to me is the one I think about the most, being 24 hours later, is the dinner scene where Mickey's just stuffing his face with raw meat. You get all of these funny, awkward moments with Kai and Mark Ruffalo's character, and then the whole thing with, oh, should I just blow his brains out? It's like, oh no, not on my Serbian carpet. Clearly that's not possible.
Yeah. She does a whole thing where she pulls the rug out from under him, literally, because she doesn't want his blood on her fancy rug.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that scene has the most where it's able to just be cut out from the movie and viewed on its own and still work the most. But yeah, it's a movie full of a bunch of scenes that have a equal tie to claim the scene of the movie, but that's the one that just I remember the most.
Yeah, and obviously the other thing they're doing in that scene is this idea that everyone's eating these very small rations of food on these crappy trays, but Mark Ruffalo and his wife have a nice big fancy dinner table and they're getting steaks and stuff like that, so there's that whole class element of it as well.
There's also a thing where every time Mickey messes up, they specifically say, we're cutting your rations in half, and that's happened at least like 4 times.
He's on like 2 peas a day at this point.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to go with probably the most emotionally resonant scene, which is the scene where we find out that Nasha wouldn't let him die alone and went into the tube with him in the hazmat suit. I think for me that is like where it was like touching on the movie I wanted. I wanted this heart to really shine through and give me that. So I think I have to pick that. But the dinner table scene, I totally get why that's the option for you. All right, MVP. This is kind of tough because I think there's an argument for 4 different people here.
Yeah.
Because I think obviously Pattinson has a lot of quirkiness and has to play multiple versions of himself. I think Nasha, arguably, the blunder of like what they do in the script with her character aside, might be a really important character that adds like a lot of the heart to the movie and is essential. And then you've got both Ruffalo and Toni Collette, who are both very memorable in how they chew the scenery and are just delightfully evil. So there's a lot of potential options here.
Yeah, those were honestly who I was wrestling between, that and Pigeon Man. Who we didn't even mention. For some reason, one of like the head followers of Mark Ruffalo is just a dude dressed in a pigeon outfit the entire movie. And I don't think they ever explain why he's wearing a pigeon outfit.
Well, I think when we first see him, he's not in a pigeon outfit because he's at like the sign up. He's like speaking to the news reporter. Right. But then when he's on the ship for the rest of the movie, he's in a pigeon outfit. I
don't know why. I think for me, as much as I enjoy the villainous aspects of Mark Ruffalo and Toni Collette, I don't think that they quite hit the MVP status for me. They're just a little bit too one note, where the other characters have a bit more depth to them, and I'm a bit more interested in what they do. It really does come down to whether or not I think being the heart of the movie, which is honestly what Nasha would be here, or being as impressive enough to play 2 characters and have these dueling ideologies between them, which one I think is more MVP worthy. I think I am going to give it to Robert Pattinson as Mickey 17 and 18, though. Collectively, I'm not going to give it to any one version of the character. I think that the interest there comes from having these 2 characters that are essentially the same person and yet have very different viewpoints on how to approach these things, and seeing not even the growth of the characters, but just how they are forced to conflict and contrast with each other.
That is fair. It's tough. I feel like I'd probably into Pat. I think if we didn't have the reservations about Nasha's middle of the story, I think Nasha would take it from me, because I feel like she adds the most to the movie in terms of like making me really care about what's going on. Right. But that misstep with her in the middle kind of like sullies it a little bit and makes me think, well, at that point I should probably give it to Pattinson just for handling the 2 roles, being entertaining. Even though at times I do think the character's a little bit in the sillier side for my taste, but I think ultimately I will say that. Also, I just done while we're on cast here, I looked up Naomi Ackie I didn't really know from anything. She's been in a few things, but just nothing I've really seen. She was in a part of the last Star Wars movie, but I mean, I don't remember anyone from that. So
I think I remember who she was. I didn't see it, but I remember her being announced in that. Yeah.
But Kai, I was like, oh, do I know her from anything? Because she looks kind of familiar, but she's got like a super Italian name. She's like Anna Maria Vartolomei. But when I clicked on her, I've not seen anything she's in. But she's in a movie from last year that got a lot of buzz, which was a big Italian version of The Count of Monte Cristo, which has got really good reviews. I've not seen it, but that was like her most well-known thing. So,
Okay.
yeah. And I don't think I even noticed she had an accent, but clearly she's Italian.
Yeah, it didn't stick out. She did a very good job.
So, yeah. Anyway,
She went to the Chris Evans School of Korean. Calling that back.
I was wondering where you were going with Chris Evans there. All right.
Yep.
Okay, categories. What do you have?
Yes. All right. I'm just gonna try to keep it brief unless I really need to say something. Visuals, I think it's very visually well done. Mostly special effects, editing wise, I think it does a very good job. Again, there is a little bit of blandness to the spaceship. It does feel a little bit just too, not sci-fi enough. It just feels like a shipping container, which works for what it's trying to do, but visually it's just a little stunted. But ultimately, I do think this one's still great, so I'll give that one an 8. Sound-wise, not a lot to really work with. I guess I will criticize it slightly because, like I said, there are a few scenes where it just feels like it's babbling a little bit, and it's kind of hard to keep track of what character is saying what. It's maybe just a thing with the mixing. It might just be the way that it was presented for me personally, but ultimately that's probably just going to be a 6 for me. It's not doing anything stand out. Acting I think was great. I don't think there's any real bad actors across the board. Everyone delivers their characters as I think they are intended to be delivered. The issue ultimately does come down to writing, which obviously is the next category. So acting, I think I'm going to give that one an 8.5. I think I'm going to bump that up just ever so slightly there. Not quite hitting the 9. Script, this is where, there are some issues here. While I like the idea of the world, and I think there are some real, potentially very interesting plots and very interesting concepts to deal with, ultimately, it felt like it wasn't playing with any of them enough as they should have been. The idea that the whole big thing at the end is we got to take out the big colonizer man before he colonizes, rather than being anything relating to the cloning process at all, kind of just didn't sit right with me. So ultimately, I think I'm probably going to give the script writing I got to give it a 5, honestly. It's not bad, but it's just, that's where all the problems are lying for me. And why I'm coming out of this movie not loving it as much as I really was. And then production value, yeah, like I said, special effects wise, it does a great job with the alien, the planet, the spaceships and all that. Everything that it does as a choice really does feel like it was made with intention and purpose. It doesn't feel like they just went with, okay, this will work for whatever this specific shot is. So ultimately that one's probably going to be a 7.5 for me.
All right. Visuals for me, I don't think I'm going to go quite as high, just because there's nothing wrong with them. The movie certainly looks perfectly fine. It's edited very competently, arguably a little too dependent on the flashbacky stuff early on, but that's that's whatever. But I also think that the visuals did anything special for me, and I don't necessarily mean show me something insane or anything like that, but even if I'm, again, comparing it to Parasite, which is maybe a bit unfair, but
yeah,
same writer director, so you know what, I think it's a valid comparison to make, is that movie has incredible cinematography. The way it builds the scenes, the way it builds quiet scenes of tension and moments that happen later on in that film is absolutely exceptional. And there's just so much in there, whereas here it kind of felt like, oh, there's so much stuff to kind of capture with the various fights that happen and whatnot, that it felt more like coverage. And I didn't really feel like I was watching a director direct in the sort of same way that I did with Parasite, or like you do with any sort of movie that feels more cinematic. If you told me that this was just going straight to a streaming service, I don't think I would be shocked at that suggestion. It kind of has that not too fancy feeling to it,
right,
from a cinematography point of view. So I'm just going to go with a solid 7 for visuals. Nothing spectacular, but certainly nothing bad either. So just good. Sound, I actually, I never really talked about it, but there was a couple of moments where I genuinely thought someone started arguing in the theater because there was some dialogue coming from the surrounds, and it was so weirdly mixed with the rest of the audio that I didn't think it was part of the movie, and then I realized it was. So I do think I want to dock it a little bit for that, because it kind of like broke the immersion.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was talking about. Like that there's, again, just some noise going on that seems like it's not part of the scene, but it's there.
Yeah, so that was a little bit weird. So, I mean, you gave that a 6, and I think I'm happy to agree with that. Acting's good. Acting's one of the strong points of the movie. I think solid 8 for this year. Pattinson's obviously doing a good job. I think the supporting players are all good. You've got a couple of veterans and the villains, but even the supporting players in the other roles do a good job. Some of them a thankless job because their characters don't get fleshed out enough. But even Stephen Yeun, whose character, who I think could just be cut from the movie, the way he delivers some of his lines early on, where he just kind of says, "Oh, I don't need to risk myself to come down and save you. You'll be fine, right?" Yeah. You know, like just the way he delivers some of those lines is really good. So I can't really fault the performances. 8 out of 10 for that. Script, you know, like we've been saying, this is where the thing really falters. And arguably some of this might have even been in post-production in the edit rather than even the script writing phase, depending on how much they shot. But that's why it's story/script, not just script, because we have to judge what's on the screen at the end. And I would say that, yeah, this is something that's in kind of that 5 range. I'm happy to agree with that as well. Production value, I think it's good, but I don't think it's great. I think it's clearly got money behind it. Clearly choices have been made, but I wouldn't say that it like goes above and beyond and makes it feel like I'm watching something epic. It always felt like a movie to me, and that's a weird thing because I'd also say that if it felt good. But
yeah, like, no, I get what you're saying. It doesn't feel like there's this larger scope and vision to it.
Yeah,
I'm not
in awe of it. I feel like the production value is like very high standard, but it doesn't feel like I'm seeing boundaries be pushed. So I think for me, I'm just going to go 7.5 on the production value. Okay. And that's that. So David, what is your final overall score for Mickey 17?
Yeah, I'm definitely not going as high as 8. I definitely don't think it quite hits that high, and I don't think it deserves below, I would say, a 6.5 either. I think those are my boundaries, so it's within there that I'm kind of bouncing between. Again, this might be something where there is a cult following. This might be something where it really does have an audience to it, and it just really resonates for them. They really get something out of it. But ultimately, I think my biggest problem comes from the fact that the message of the movie, in a lot of ways, feels like it's trying to say something about, you know, all life is important and like we shouldn't put one above anybody else for whatever reason. But I think I would have wanted it to be a bit more specific to something about the whole cloning and like an identity sort of message. Whereas the end of this movie does really just lean on colonizer bad sort of ending, and I don't know, it didn't stick it as well as I really wanted it to. And considering this type of movie is really all about what that message kind of is, when it doesn't have this shock and awe spectacle to it, it just didn't land. So I think I got to go a little bit on the lower side here, and I think I'm probably going to give this one just a 6.5.
Yeah, it's such a weird one because I've got so much, like, there's things I love and like, and so many things I have mixed feelings on. I would say that, you know, as much as I thematically get the idea that you have this character relate to these creatures who are also going to be just disposable, and that's the other big thing. I think the idea of like the part of the message is that, oh, the 1%, the people in charge, view their underlings as disposable, they're expendable, they can be replaced over and over. Yeah. And this is literal in this case, as he keeps getting replaced by himself. And that's great, but I never felt like they elevated that to saying something greater with it. It was just kind of like, once you get that, that's it. I don't know if it ever evolves past the initial idea. But so as much as I do think the creatures, I get how they relate thematically, and I do like some of the sympathy we get from them for the third act. Part of me does think that having all these big CG creatures running around and having characters, you know, run around them and have it become more about them does take away from just exploring the actual character of Mickey and it being a bit of fight for him. Like, as much as this may not sound like ideal to a lot of people, like there's a famous episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation where Picard has to, like, in a trial situation, argue that Data has rights. Like, he's an android, yes, but he has rights because he's a being, because he's a life form. And I almost really wanted the third act of this movie to be some sort of weird version of that episode, which is called A Measure of a Man, where maybe Nasha and one or two others have to argue why both Mickeys should be left alive and why it's wrong to kill either of them. I wanted that debate more than I wanted running around chasing CG aliens, you know?
I mean, honestly, if you're going with the Star Trek thing, this is just a transporter mishap. This is a 100% an issue of like, oh, now there's two of them. What do we do?
Yeah, except, there's a lot of weight here because it comes from the society they're in. Whereas Star Trek society is supposed to be perfect, so it would just be an accident. Whereas this is like bred out of like how awful these people are to begin with.
It's also worth noting this does give an exact date. This is like 30, 40 years in the future.
Yeah, it's
like,
not that far at all.
Far off,
it was like 2056 or something like that. It's like not that long. So anyway, all that said, it has a lot of positives, but it definitely left me feeling very mixed by the end. So, I mean, your rating was sounding kind of right, to be honest. I think not quite good. Like, decent, lots of things in there I like, but it's just not quite enough to get to good. So I think I'm going to agree with the 6.5.
All right.
All right, well, there you go. Obviously, David's got his homework movie in a second, but I'll just tell you a little bit about Patreon right now. If you like supporting the show, and not just this, but also the other movie podcast we do, the Collector's Cut, or the horror movie podcast that I do with Tim, Screams After Midnight, you can support all of this stuff by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Me and David do two monthly bonus shows over there. One's the Criterion Cut, where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and the other is where we do some of the worst movies ever made in a show called Extra Reels, with films by Neil Breen, Uwe Boll, and other such auteurs, if you will.
Yay.
There's been a whole...
So happy.
Yeah, there's a back catalogue of both those shows now. There's back catalogues for bonus streams episodes. There's, like all of it's building up, and it helps keep all this content coming. It's what allows me to do the shows. So go over and see if you want to help support the stuff. But yes, every week on the Ace, David goes back and watches a movie that we did on the show before he joined the show, so he can eventually be completely and utterly cut up. So, What was this week's homework movie?
Well, I've been working through 2020's movies because we got a countdown on that coming up, and because I cannot do something that's part of a franchise for new releases because it would just mess up our whole recording schedule, I went with one that was its own separate thing, and I did Sputnik, a 2020 Russian film, I believe.
That sounds right.
Yes. So for anyone unaware, it's just an astronaut comes back from space, or a cosmonaut, I guess I should say, comes back from space, and something's wrong with him, and we get a outsider pulled in to try to figure out what it is, and very quickly turns out, whoops, it's an alien. I liked it. I think it had a toned down atmosphere to it that really made the amazement of this alien figure kind of pop, because it felt kind of out of place in this sort of more stripped back atmosphere where it didn't feel like, super sci-fi or anything like that. I think it is set in the 80s. Like, this is set in the late Soviet era. So it is an issue of like old technology, but then you have this very modern looking alien specimen that's running around. So it's a very intriguing way of presenting that. Ultimately, I think where my issues came in is that it kind of felt like the main lead character's motivations were left very much up to the whims of whoever it is she talked to last. Like, she doesn't have a very strong guiding principle of this is a thing I need to do, want to do. It's ultimately whoever the last person she talked to is like, oh, okay, we'll make that happen. And it's a shame because she is a very interesting character, ultimately. I think that the way they flesh her out makes her a intriguing person to follow, but ultimately it's not until the third act where we actually get this sort of, oh, okay, this is who this really is. Beyond that, it's kind of just a action movie, a bit more blood and guts than your standard, like, normal sci-fi fare. It's got a bit more of gore to it. I would say Ultimately, it is a solid film, but it does kind of just happen. It doesn't feel like there is a massive build up to the end or any real stakes. It just is oh, okay, well, that's done now. So I think I'm probably going to come down in a similar sort of fashion as what we were talking about for Mickey and come at a 6.5.
The fact that I didn't chime in for any of that should tell you that I remember very little about this movie.
It was a few years back. I'm not surprised.
It did not leave. I mean, I remember the basic gist of it, but I did not. Like, you started talking about the main character, and I'm like, I couldn't even picture this woman's face.
Yeah, that's just it. She's very bland. She doesn't have a lot of stuff to her until you get to the very end of the movie, and then it's like, oh, that's who you are. Got it.
Yeah. So, okay, well, interesting one to cross off, I guess.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, there you go. That is the show, everyone. That's been the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Join us next week for another new release, although this one's a Netflix movie. We'll be looking at the new Russo Brothers movie, starring Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby Brown. Oh, you didn't know he was in it?
I didn't know Chris Pratt was it. God damn it.
Next week, we review The Electric State.
Great.
I have to admit, my expectations are muted going into this one.
It used to be a hit or a miss to say the phrase a Netflix original, but I think nowadays it's more miss than hit.
I mean, the last one we did was Atlas. Oh, actually, maybe technically it was Rebel Moon 2. I don't know which came second.
Oh, okay. No, that's better. Yeah, thanks for that one. Yeah.
The last three we did were Rebel Moon 1, Atlas, and Rebel Moon 2. So
great.
Buckle up! Thank you for joining us, everyone. We do appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer at Salsa.